And there's a reciprocal interaction between arousal and desire, but there's not a one-to-one link. You can feel desire but no arousal. You can feel arousal but no desire. Physiological outputs, gut churning, heart rate acceleration. It's clearly the autonomic nervous system is being activated at the times of arousal. I respectfully held out my hand to her and she took it with an air of utter indifference, but she pressed it firmly as she climbed into the carriage. The reader will be able to imagine the flame which this sent racing through my blood. That's the expert of all time, possibly Casanova. And indeed, I mean, I'm sure any male could envisage the fire that it sent through his blood when he got the come on sign from the woman going into the carriage. There's a similar one here from Catherine Millet. I have to do respect, I'll try to do my best. Sorry for the accent. When we have just said goodnight to each other, he pulls me to him and kisses me on the mouth. In the morning I'll come and see you in your room. I can feel the spasm rising right up to my stomach. I can't recommend it. It's not a particularly good book, but some people might like it. I didn't find it a great aphrodisiac, whereas Casanova is, I would say. Okay, the role of arousal. We distinguish between specific and general arousal. So general arousal could be due to anything. It could be due to anger or fear or sex. A perfectly general thing. And then there is specific sexual arousal, which is a sort of subcategory of the general arousal. And chance events can set off arousal with implications for sexual arousal. In development this is evident, even in the adult this is evident. And then there is asexuality, where there is sexual arousal but no desire. And what I suggest this is saying is that this person has not learned a link between a target stimulus, another individual, and a state of sexual arousal. They've just not learned it. Whereas most of us who are not asexual have learned a relationship between a partner, be it a male or female or whatever, according to our taste, and a state of arousal. So it's the exceptions, I think, that prove the rule. I think we have something like this: general arousal here, a subset of which is sexual arousal. This, in a sense, can spill over into this. And this is linked to sexual desire. It's also linked to genital blood flow. The famous rope bridge experiment, most OU courses include this. You might recall it, that chaps are investigated as they walk across this swinging rope bridge, which they're quite scared of. And when they get to the other side, it's compared with men walking across a stable bridge. And it's found the ones crossing the rope bridge who experience fear seem to evidence more sexual desire when they get to the other side, when they're interviewed by an attractive research assistant. The assumption is that they're heterosexual. I guess it's checked out as a female research assistant. In other words, there's a flexibility about the use of arousal. It can be recruited to sex. So there you have it. And in terms of development, you can get early triggers to arousal that can be positive or negative. But then when sexual maturity kicks in, those cognitions and that arousal can be recruited in sexual desire, even though the initial experience could be negative. It might be positive, it might be negative. Either way, it can transform itself into something positive. Here's these are largely anecdotal, but there are many of them, and they keep cropping up again and again. Here, this is a 14-year-old boy in Chicago. Someone pricked a balloon behind his head at a party. He went running out in fear. Later, when sexual maturity kicked in, he found blowing up balloons to be an erotic turn-on. It only came to light when he was arrested in a department store asking female assistants to blow up balloons while he watched, and he was masturbating behind the counter. Here's another one from the most famous British sexologist, Havelock Ellis, in the Victorian period. Havelock Ellis's mother was taken short and needed to go into the bushes in Regent's Park to urinate. When she came out, she looked at her son and he looked at her, and they both looked very embarrassed about it. Subsequently, with sexual maturity, Havelock Ellis had a particular fetish about urinating women and succeeded in paying large numbers of them to urinate in front of him. Here's another, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the Swiss philosopher. Early negative experience, he was beaten with a whip by his governess, which hurt, but then with maturity he transformed it into sexual desire, writing that all his sexual experiences subsequent were mere pale imitations of the turn on he felt thinking about the experience with his governess. Here's another I suggest, not well known, I've not read anyone, I think I was the first to observe this, I might not be, but Shipman, the most prolific serial killer in world history outside of wartime, Manchester GP, highly respected guy in his community. Now what seems to have happened, what we know happened was that he witnessed his mother dying under the influence of repeated morphine injections for the pain of cancer. That traumatized him, and he went running around the streets of Nottingham all night, jogging, because he was so upset by the trauma of his mother. Then when he became a doctor, this seems to have transformed itself into something desirable. Now, was it sexual? I would claim he was a necrophiliac. It doesn't mean he necessarily had sex as such with his patients. We don't know what he did with them. We simply don't know. But a necrophiliac is one who is turned on by death, and he was undoubtedly turned on by death. I imagine he took something away from the home and masturbated with it later. Here's another, one of your near neighbours, Richard. Was, yes. Dennis Nilsson. Richard showed me this innocuous-looking house here in Muswell Hill with the top flat occupied by Dennis Nilsson, who died earlier this year in prison. What happened with Nilsson would, I suggest, be the following. He was much devoted to his grandfather. He didn't get on with either his father or his mother very well. His grandfather, he really found a soulmate. And one day the grandfather died in his boat, and the young Nilsson got to witness the dead body of his father, which shocked and horrified him. When sexual maturity came, however, he attracted young gay men back to his apartment and strangled them, and looked at their dead bodies, and he looked at his own body and their bodies in a mirror. It only came to light, not because of the police, but because of a plumber. Plumber discovered it because the drains got blocked with so many bits of flesh being flushed down the drains. The plumber alerted the police, and the police came in. I think he got through 17 young men. They were sort of drifters in the margins of society. They weren't missed, no one really knew who they were. But I think it illustrates this fundamental point that a negative can be transformed into a positive. Hierarchies of control. I've referred to this already as a low-level system 1, old in evolution and development. It's fast, it's automatic, it's stimulus-driven, incentive-driven, it's sometimes unconscious. There is a system 2, which is relatively new in evolution and development. It's slow, it's cognitive, and it's conscious. And these two are matched together in the human brain. They collaborate in our behavior. The weight of control in system 1 is upon subcortical limbic brain regions, this low-level dopamine pathway amongst others. The weight in system 2 is upon prefrontal advanced cortical pathways. So it's something like this. There is an old 17th century cottage, and it has all mod cons, electricity, plumbing, and so on and so on. And somehow the two merge together. But of course there's going to be problems when you put these two together. But you've still got the original design, but rather than knock down the cottage and start again, because you can't do that in evolutionary terms, and heaven help you, people want to do it here either, you tinker with what's there and improve it, make it modern. And that's what I would suggest what evolution has done with us. So incentives now can act at both unconscious and conscious level to draw attention. And you see, it's not easy being a man, heterosexual man. It's not easy, because if you follow this sort of logic, then it requires constant vigilance to inhibit the low-level system. You've got to be permanently on your guard, otherwise your eyes will be drawn off to a side. It's not easy. There's a newly emerging brain region in terms of both evolutionary development added on to older brain regions. And I would suggest that this maps something onto Freud with the old id and the superego, the policeman, the internal policeman. And it also, to some extent, maps onto Skinner with reinforcement and rule-governed behaviour. Now, the hierarchy can be in competition or conflict. There can be a low-level desire, but high-level restraint. That is resisting temptation, be it food, drugs, or sex. So the low level is urging you on, and the high level is putting the brakes on. Conversely, the low level can be moving you away, and the high level can be urging you on. So to take an example here, a woman might be married to a man whose breath smells horrendous, he's drunk, and he's a pretty nasty piece of work, and the last thing she wants is to have sexual relations with him, but she knows to keep the peace she needs to have sexual relations. So the very high level goal in the face of disgust is urging her on. So a common theme of competition, hedonistic eating versus ideal weight, revenge versus fear of capture, drug taking versus quitting, sexual infidelity versus fidelity. These are all examples of low level pulls being opposed by high level restraint. Changing weight between system one, well, there are various ways it changes with development, it changes with brain damage, it changes all sorts of ways, but one that you need to be careful of, drugs change the weight, alcohol change. Alcohol increases the weight of system one. Your restraint tends to go out of the window the more drinks you take in, because it knocks out the prefrontal cortex, which is exerted. Furthermore, it's even worse than that, because people look much more attractive after a few glasses of alcohol. So if you're trying to resist temptation, stay clear of alcohol. It's known as beer goggles. This is equally true, I'm sure, of gay communities, certainly true of heterosexual communities. Evolutionary perspectives. What I suggest is happening in terms of evolution. Evolutionary psychologists propose modules. This is ways of solving problems, automatic built-in solutions to problems, rapid, unconsciously mediated prescriptions on what to do. This is the so-called Santa Barbara School of evolutionary psychology. We're all equipped with modules that give us the answer to what to do. But in addition, I would suggest that we have free space left. We're not entirely dependent upon these modules. We have a certain amount of free space left as a result of the enlargement of the prefrontal cortex. And what we find, though, in terms of evolution, that we have a certain evolutionary mismatch. Addictive drugs short-circuit adaptive processes. Foods of high sugar content not found in our early evolution, because there is obesity. Pornography, sexual availability, clothing, high erotic clothing, not around in our early environment, and so the presence of these things can be addictive in our present environment. I mean, look, this guy has no chance, really. Ease of access at low cost. I don't mean the financial cost, I mean he just needs to put his foot on the pedal and gear change or whatever. Novelty, variety, uncertainty, exaggerated attraction, look at the boots and the short skirts, forbidden fruit and youth. Really, what chance does that chap have in that situation? These, poor guy, you're in for sorry. I mean, this was not like this in our early evolution, just as Tesco was not around in our early evolution, just as methamphetamine was not around in our early evolution. Groupies, this is an interesting phenomenon. Girls who are prepared to throw themselves at men, casting any sort of reserve to the wind, in musicians and sportsmen particularly, attract groupies. What I suggest is they are very rich males, almost always, and there's a high level of arousal involved. I have a good example of the Walker Brothers. It shows my age. I don't know if anyone here can remember the Walker Brothers, but they were popular in the 60s and 70s, an American trio. And I went to a concert of theirs. They were really great. I went to a concert of theirs in Cambridge in around 1968, and there were groupies around the stage. And every time one of the Walker Brothers got a bit near the stage, then bouncers came in to hold him back. It was otherwise they were trying to grab him and pull him off the stage. And they almost succeeded. What they did succeed in doing was ripping his shirt. Well, I think it was Scott Walker. They ripped his shirt off and they tore it up in small pieces. Now, I'm pretty sure those girls would gladly have cast discretion and everything else to the wind to have jumped into the bed with Scott Walker. Now, what I suggest is happening is that they're overwhelmed by fame. They're overwhelmed by the fame and riches of it, but music as well is also a powerful aphrodisiac in the case of these women. Maybe from strictly evolutionary psychology, it might not be too big a safe bet to try to grab one of the Walker brothers. In fact, the groupies might be much safer throwing themselves at groups of chartered accountants, but that doesn't usually happen. One could imagine, even though a situation like this transferring itself to LOUPS at Warwick, in which case you might well be glad that you're not wearing a shirt and you're wearing a t-shirt. I just sort of a thought experiment, imagine what it might look like. I've not seen anything quite like that at Warwick, but I talked once to some members of a famous American pop group. They invited us, I won't mention their name, but they invited us to one of their concerts. And I took us out to dinner in San Francisco afterwards, and the wife of one member of the group was absolutely appalled by the behaviour of one of the members of the group. She said after every concert he picks the two most attractive women standing at the stage door and takes them back to his hotel room. Yeah, I suppose I felt a bit of negative emotion there, more like envy, I guess, than anything else. Okay, sexual jealousy. Now, I think this has something to say. A module, evolutionary psychology. It's a pity not Brian, who is it? Who's the Steven Pinker fan? God, I mean, Gaga. You won't mention his name, you know what I'm getting at. A woman having sex with another man is always a threat to the man's genetic interests, and men should squirm at the thought of their wives or girlfriends having sex with another man, which is indeed true and makes good evolutionary adaptive sense. But we have been given this, we've been given some degrees of freedom because of the prefrontal cortex, and B, there is a flexibility of arousal. It can be transformed according to context. So you get cultures where the wife is the visiting guest, male, is invited to sleep with the wife. Now, whether the male husband actually feels jealousy, I don't know, but it is said not. So, in other words, there is the basic biological process, but there's also a social, cultural layer of understanding on top of this. I mean, we know from evidence that this phenomenon exists in the Western society, where males actively encourage their females. The only one I could find was Chorley in Lancashire. I hadn't really thought it was a hotbed of eroticism, Chorley in Lancashire. There it is. And this exemplifies the principle that nothing is set in concrete. Evolutionary psychology gives suggestions, but that's about it. Sex differences. Now, this is a red flag to a bull. I might have got away with saying everything I've said so far, even in our psychology department at the OU, but I'd fear for my life if I went to our psychology department until the next part, because full of social constructionists and feminists, they really don't like this at all. And the adaptive value, I think there's an adaptive value in sex differences in sexual desire, and I suggest that dopamine is a common currency. What I would suggest is that liking, there's no difference between men and women in terms of liking sex, though even that might be controversial, but I think I'm safe there. There's not an obvious difference. What there clearly is a difference in wanting as expressed in behaviour. Women typically are not as prepared to put in effort, certainly not for promiscuous casual sex as men are, whereas men are relatively prepared to put effort in. It might be that women want to want. Women might say they want to feel like men, but they don't act like men, I would suggest. This is, I've developed a model here, which is short articles appeared already. The full article is coming out in a book edited by Lance Workman, should be later this year. What I'm suggesting is that women attribute more to meaning and men attribute more to physical stimulation from the partner. And I would say this is true of gay men and women as well as heterosexual men and women, though it's not been investigated. I've not spent so much time thinking about it. But I would say we're all somewhere on one of these scales between meaning and physical. Women tend to be more the meaning end, men more the physical end. And kind of excitatory factors. Women much change over the lifetime with social circumstances. Men change rather little with social circumstances over a lifetime. Sexual orientation with women, it's more flexible. Some women in the 1960s and 70s decided as a political gesture that they would become gay. I never heard of men deciding to become gay. I would imagine that men know in advance whether they're heterosexual, homosexual, or gay. Paedophilia, which is defined by the physical size of the stimulus, quite literally so, is much more common in men than in women. It exists in women, but it's very rare. Sadly, it's less rare in men. Ideal type of partner, not so tightly defined by physical characteristics in women, and it's inconsistent across individuals, I would claim. There isn't a standard stereotype of attraction for women to quite the same degree there is for men. There's variability in both, sure, but men are more clearly defined by physical characteristics than are women, I would suggest. This is sorted fairly quickly, my own taste here. If you examine them, now I say two things about this. One, the physical attributes are pretty obvious. It can be measured in terms of bone structure of the face. That's pretty straightforward, obvious. But they are all famous, you can recognise most of them, I guess. But the fact they're famous is indifferent. It's just that famous people crop up on Google images more than non-famous ones. They could all be cashiers at our local Tesco supermarket, and it would make not the slightest bit of difference to me in terms of desire. Women don't like that sort of comment very much. But it's true, I have to admit it's true. My wife, well, that makes perfectly good sense. TV 5 mon. But some of it doesn't make any sense. That's so, well, you wait now, you've seen nothing. You wait till you see next. This is my wife's take. You see, you laugh. There wasn't a single man in the room who laughed when I showed my images. You all sat there as if you were in a funeral. Here, women giggle. What have they all got in common? It's hard to see, except they're all famous, they're all rich, they're all intelligent.
Well,
I don't know about that.
Okay, all but one. You don't like. You see, I mean, look at this guy. I mean, he's gone to seed a bit, hasn't he, now? You know, he's not classically beautiful by any criteria, I wouldn't have thought. But, you know, he's particularly gone to seed. You know, he gets drunk and falls off his motorbike regularly. It's a fact, if you don't know, it's the French actor Gérard Depardieu.
they've all got your haircut, Fred.
Sorry?
They've all got your haircut.
Could be that. Yeah. One time I gave this lecture and a couple of women came up and said, I could see why she liked her, she looks just like you. My wife also says Wilfrid Bramble is attractive.
Oh, really?
They're too young to know Wilfrid, but the old man in Steptoe son. I said, is that because he's like you? I said, why is he like me, physically or psychologically? Olga said both. So it's not, there we are. Okay, ideal type of partner. Women sensitive to context and assessment of commitment is more likely to be present there than it is in men. Not always. Less sensitive to context and social status. Men care relatively little about social status. Not an emphasis upon youth, neither lesbian nor heterosexual. An emphasis upon youth, gay and heterosexual. It doesn't mean that you only are attracted to youth, it means the ideal target is youth for males. Changes with age with women, so that as the woman gets older, so her ideal incentive follows her just behind. So that it is possible that a woman of 62 might still find a man of 74 attractive. Well, I have 3 hours left. Whereas with men, heterosexual attraction, little change, 26 years is optimal. So even if he's 90, he still tends to find the 26-year-old the most attractive. And she presumably doesn't find the 90-year-old most attractive. But she's not entirely put off for him sometimes, particularly if he's got a big bank balance. Seeking anonymous varieties saw relatively little lesbian or heterosexual women. I say very much, maybe that's not true, I have to emphasize this again. There are many men, heterosexual and homosexual, completely faithful to their partners lifelong and consider nothing else. But there is more evidence of promiscuity in male, or desire for promiscuity in males, than there is. And in the gay community, it can be that a promiscuous male can very easily find another promiscuous male. You only have to go down Old Compton Street. Even if I went there, I'd probably find someone, even at 74, albeit and 364 days. Whereas I wouldn't know where to start looking in London for a heterosexual female. So there's no doubt there is some kind of asymmetry going on here. It's not total, it's not absolute, but it's there. Now, I've never heard of a single instance of a woman being arrested under circumstances like this. A toilet in Los Angeles. You may ask, why on earth would someone like George Michael go to pick up men in a toilet in Los Angeles when he must have the pick of the gay males of Los Angeles, being handsome, famous and rich? The only reason I can suggest is that it's the forbidden fruit, and it's exciting because it's transgression. I imagine so, I don't know, I'm guessing. But the point is this never happens to women. I've never heard of a single instance of this happening in women's